Friends, welcome back to Being and Making Disciples. Peace be with you. I'm very happy to be joined by Dave Plisky, who is the Director of Product and Innovation at DeSales Media. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan.
So today we are going to talk about a study that DeSales conducted with Vinaya Research Group. But before we get into that, I just wanted to ask about you and how you came to be a follower of Jesus and ended up in your role working for the church.
I'll try to make it short. I was a cradle Catholic, grew up in Southern California. Thought I was pretty religious because we went to church every week. Turns out that's not really how it works. um, it was kind of an all too typical story of being very catechized, sacramentalized, but not evangelized. And in college, I started to understand the value of community in the church and how important that is. Um, and It really wasn't until I met my wife. I had since being into sales, I actually went through a period where I wasn't going to mass anymore. In the last, that was like maybe started 6 or 5 years ago,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until my wife and I really brought each other back to the church before we were married. What happened was she was going to evangelical service and asked me to join her, and I wasn't going to mass at all at that point in my life. The only time in my life I wasn't going to mass. Kind of a rough period, if you ask me. And so I joined her. Went a couple times. This is kind of the Hillsong style thing, and I was just missing the Eucharist. I was like, "Is it okay if we go to mass next time?" And she was like, "Sure." It turned out she had actually grown up Catholic, but had never received her sacraments, and it just worked. It was just beautiful. She ended up receiving all of her sacraments before we got married a couple of years ago. So, um, yeah, I like to think that we kind of brought each other back to church.
That's
Um,
awesome. Hi, you
yeah,
can give each other high fives over that one.
yeah. I mean, isn't that beautiful that the sacrament itself? I mean, she is my sacrament, in
Yeah.
that way. So, um, then in terms of the sales, I've done marketing my whole career basically, and when I got to New York, I was working at first at a big beauty brand, and then at a social media management company, and like tech startup, and in both cases, it just was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I ultimately doing? It would be good for a while, like the first year is like, oh, I'm growing so much, I'm learning a lot, it's a great team, super smart people, blah blah blah. But then ultimately I got into this rut where it's like, I think I'm just helping the CEO get rich ultimately.
Yeah.
And, look, I'm not poo-pooing secular jobs at all, but I felt like I needed something more meaningful. And so I had a conversation with my pastor. I was living in Prospect Heights, part of Brooklyn, which is where the Co-Cathedral of St. Joseph is. In fact, I was there when it got elevated to the status of Co-Cathedral. And I didn't know it at the time, but my pastor was the chairman of DeSales Media Group, essentially lay run organization that did a ton of great work in the church. And I can tell you about that in a second. But so we were friends. We would go to dinner regularly, and I think I told him at one point, early on, I was like, "How do I work for the church?" But I think I said it really stupidly because I didn't know how anything worked. I was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I was like, "Can I work remotely for the Holy See?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And but he kept it in the back of his mind, and 4 years later, the director of marketing digital was leaving to sales, and he started interviewing me for that position. That's how I made my way in. So, it was really, so providential, and just so nice to have someone, be thoughtful like that, to remember all those years later when it mattered.
Yeah, 4 years is a long time to keep somebody in the back of your mind and say, "I'm gonna call that person if this ever comes
Yeah,
available." And
yeah.
I also don't think it's stupid to say, "How can I work remotely for the Holy See?" I mean, that sounds like working there would be amazing,
Yeah.
but it would also be nice to stay home and be able to say, "I work in the Vatican."
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I don't know if I could deal with, some of Rome's stuff.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, it's great to visit.
yeah, right. Right, exactly.
Um, well, can
But
you tell me a little bit about, DeSales Media?
yeah, just very quickly, we basically have 5 divisions. We run a lot of news stuff in the Catholic New York area. So we have an English language, Spanish language newspapers, as well as a nightly newscast. We also do our studios. division it comprises the television, so net TV in the New York area, as well as all the content that we put on there. So something fun for listeners might be we have this show called The Chair that came out recently, where we went and visited 85 different dioceses. We interviewed their bishops about the past, present, and future of the Catholic Church, kind of from their perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that show is called The Chair, referring to the cathedra, right, in every cathedral. And you can get it. You can get it for free. It's all 85 episodes are free online. Thechair.com/watch now is where you can go see that. Um, anyway, continuing on, we have an education portion called Catholic Telemedia Network that gives grants to Catholic schools in the New York area to make them, competitive with the best public schools, private schools rather. We have agency services, so we do marketing, video production, press and media relations, et cetera, for the different offices and agencies of the diocese and even other dioceses. And finally, the technology piece, which is sort of my area, where we really are looking to modernize, Catholic, communications technology at the parish level, schools, ministries, and even other dioceses. So, things like websites and email communications and live mass
Yeah,
streaming,
yeah.
even all that kind of stuff. So,
Gotcha.
but I work on a lot of other special projects on the side. So that's kind of where how this study came up.
Oh, gotcha. Well, that's a great segue. So, special project. This was a study that DeSales conducted with, is it Vinea?
I think they pronounce it Vinia.
Vinea, okay.
But
So
yeah.
Vinea Research, and you surveyed Catholics who considered themselves intentional disciples. Can you give us an overview of what that study and specifically what it measured?
Yeah. Yeah. So the study, so what we really wanted to know was, what does the spiritual life look like of, intentional disciples, and what are their unmet needs? And if I could take a step back and just explain how we got there. Um, So I told you I'm a marketer by trade. So I think in terms of marketing. So bear with me here. But when brands approach marketing, when brands or companies or approach product marketing, let's say, there's a funnel. First you just want to make people aware of a product. Then once they're aware, you want to get them to consider a product by learning more about it. Then you want to get them to actually purchase that product and see it. Like, there's like fewer and fewer people making their way through this. That's why it's called a funnel.
Mhm.
You want them to make that purchase, but that's not where you want it to stop. You actually want it to get repeat purchases out of them. You want it to become a loyal customer. That's why we have loyalty programs and things like that. But ultimately, the holy grail of the marketing funnel is to turn this person into what they call a brand advocate, someone who is so excited about the brand that they go out and tell people about it, because free marketing for the company,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
and a personal testimonial, word of mouth, all that kind of stuff. So this is like, the Harley Davidson guy that's got the tattoo of the logo emblazoned on his bicep. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a brand advocate.
Right.
So, but what does that sound like? Doesn't that sound a lot like a disciple who's on fire for the Lord and has no choice but to just spread the joy of the gospel to
100%.
everyone they meet? And that's what we're really looking for, is these intentional disciples, because they do the work of raising awareness and bringing people into the top of the funnel with them. So, go ahead.
It's almost like that's like Jesus didn't envision any other strategy than that.
Jesus was an amazing marketer. Evangelization is marketing, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Or marketing is evangelization, if you want. In any case, I mean, that's even true, by the way. You see tech startups all the time have an evangelization person at the top, like
Yeah,
someone,
yeah.
and they call it that because that's what it is. Anyway, um, so if that's true, then our question became, what are the unmet needs of intentional disciples? What do these people need more of for us to serve those most on fire, so that they can then in turn go out on mission and bring and serve others? So we designed the study. Like I said, it was kind of long. Honestly, it got longer as we were like, oh, but we want to know that and that too. And it did. So most people, I think, took about half an hour to do it, which meant, they were really invested in this
Yeah.
totally free to take survey. Um, but we designed it in a way. So, you know, we didn't want to just, so it's very difficult to make assumptions about people's interior lives, right? Based on external signals.
Yeah.
But we also didn't want to just ask, hey, are you an intentional disciple of Jesus Christ? Because it can be off-putting, and some people who are may say that they're not out of humility or just maybe having a different criteria set. And sometimes those who are not may say they are because they
Yeah.
have lower standards or whatever. And look, and it's not about this exclusivity thing, but what we really wanted to get down to is like, all right, these very devout Catholics, that there's a difference there, right? These people who are going out on mission. So the way that we defined it was, first of all, upfront in the first four questions were what we called screener questions, which basically validated that someone's in the right place, right? We didn't want to waste anyone's time, and and we wanted our data to be, what we were looking for. So we asked, are you Christian? Are you Catholic? Are you in the U.S.? And do you go to mass at least once a week? So if they didn't attend mass at least once a week, and by the way, this was all being done between May and December of 2021. So COVID was still a thing in a lot of places. So we did allow for that. We said, online or in person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then the actual questions began. And the only other cleanup that we really did to kind of make sure that we were really honing in on the intentional discipleship population, the intentional disciple population, was to remove people who said that faith is not a significant part or a limited to a familial or cultural part of who they are, people who never pray outside of mass, and people for whom faith has zero impact on family, social, or interior life. So that ended up removing a couple hundred more people, and we ended up with 3,137 respondents. This
That's
was,
a
yeah,
really good sample.
it was a good sample, but it was difficult to attain because, usually, research firms like Vimeo will just rent a list of people who self-identify as Catholic, and
Mhm.
that wasn't possible. When we did that to start, we got zero responses. No one was making the cut, uh,
Oh,
which was rough to see.
yeah.
But so I ended up kind of changing the strategy, and I made a long list of ministries basically who I thought who would have intentional discipleships in their audiences, and said to them, look, uh help us get this out to your audience. What's in it for us is we have enough people taking the survey. What's in it for you is we'll give you free access to the data, and we have made this completely free for everyone. So yeah, it worked
Thank
out.
you. Thanks. I mean, that's because this is helpful for the whole church, and every diocese, ministry, parish would benefit from being able to look at this and understand. I
Hmm.
mean, what do these people look like, and then, as you said, what do they need?
Right, that's
Um,
right.
Now, before we get into that, I feel like I know the answer to this, but why did the sales media decide to do this study?
Well, we feel like making decisions without it being data driven is not a good use of time and money, the resources, in 2022, right? Like some people, kind of say, oh, technology, you don't need that. Honestly, I disagree. The fact that we have the ability to measure like this is a gift from the Holy Spirit. This
Yeah,
is the Holy Spirit working, and so anyway, yeah. We didn't want, we had never seen any surveys done like this. I have never seen one focusing specifically on Catholic intentional disciples in the U.S. So that's why this was, we're like, we got to do this. We have to do it ourselves. And
absolutely.
given that we're not a research company, we were like, all right, we need help, please.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so
Hans
glad you
Hans
did.
Yeah, thank you. Hans Plate is the principal over at Vinia, and he and I are in a Catholic entrepreneurship group together called Scent. So that's how we know each other.
Gotcha. So Vinia is a Catholic organization.
Yes, they are.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Cool. Yeah, I'd never heard of him until this, but I mean, I love uh, the clarity there. Unless you have data, you really aren't going to understand the best way to approach people. And it's
Yeah.
I'm sure on this podcast I've quoted Monsignor Luigi Giussani a number of times as saying, "There's nothing more unreasonable than answering a question that hasn't been asked." And until you
Yeah.
know what people need, what people want, you're not even going to have a conversation that appeals to them.
Look, we had hunches, I had ideas, but I didn't want to just assume. The worst thing a marketer can do is assume that whatever they think and their experience is everyone's experience. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to make that assumption. So
That's gotta be a really hard inclination to fight.
it is. It absolutely is. It's I mean, look, if you happen to be seeking to serve the audience segment that you are a part of. If I was trying to reach 30 something white males in the Northeast, who whatever are Catholic and all this stuff, then yeah, like maybe I can start to make some assumptions about my audience because I know myself probably better than any other
Yeah,
audience
yeah.
segment. But if you're trying to reach something totally different, or in this case, a really variated group of respondents, then no, I don't want to make assumptions like that.
So, what did you find?
Yeah, so a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, it was long, but I'll try to limit it to some of the highest level things. And you tell me what you're most interested in talking more about. How about that?
Sure, sure.
One major thing is that 1 in 5 are uncomfortable talking about their faith with others. And remember, we're talking about the most, you know, the serious, the very devout Catholics.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, we found out what their top barriers to evangelization include. Um, we heard about so there's more about evangelization we can talk about there. We heard about the fact that almost all respondents use both physical and digital aids in living out their faith. So in terms of, you think of things like the Bible or prayer books or things like that as like a faith aid, a physical faith aid, and
yeah.
then maybe things like iBreviary or podcasts or thing like that as digital. And I just figured that this was surprising to me because I figured some people would choose one and some people choose the other, but apparently we have more integrated lives than that at this point, um, even among the most faithful. Um, we learned that nearly half have never received spiritual direction, and more than half do not go on retreat. So those are some of the top findings that we can maybe dive more into if you like.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what is if there's a persona that you could put together of an
Mhm.
intentional disciple, what would that look like?
That's a great question. I think this is a person who um, I mean, for starters, you're going to mass at least every Sunday.
Yeah,
Most are getting to mass more than every Sunday. I'm not necessarily daily, because life, but certainly they're getting in some daily masses or other types of masses, things like that. I think this person is someone who prays every day, um, for often an hour, not always an hour. This is someone who's really dedicating time to the
yeah,
Lord in silence and solitude. Um, so, I mean, what we were learning, like I said, not many of them, only 20% are currently receiving spiritual direction. So I can't make that statement that
yeah, yeah,
this is going to be a thing for them. But I think it's at least on their mind. If they're not, hopefully they've are considering it, or they're in between or something like that. I think that these, again, more than half do not go on retreat. That was really sad for me to see. I was surprised. Even confession was listed as one of the things that they're not exactly strong, have a strength in. So
yeah, yeah.
so maybe so most are going to confession, but maybe not as much as we should be. Um, some are going on retreat, but not as many as should be. Um, um, I think these are people who are really integrating their faith into every aspect of their life, right? Their social life, their family life, their work life, their personal life, like all these elements. Um, I think that their Catholic identity is very close, is a very important part of who they are, and not for the church as the end, but as a means to Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah, yeah. How does that manifest?
Um, I think these people are I think there's a joy about these people that can't be denied. I think that there's something intangible that you just kind of you're like, oh, this is someone who's that doesn't mean there's no suffering in life, but it means that they've got their North Star really clear, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I like that.
yeah, I think that these are people who are probably leaders in their faith communities. They're likely the ones. Um, pretty active in ministry, and even if it's just on a volunteer basis or something like that, and tithing, and those types of things. um, I think these are people who are Yeah, I don't want to make too many assumptions because there's so many expressions of the faith. Catholic
Yeah,
does
yeah,
mean universal after all,
yeah,
and I feel like we live up to that in a lot of ways.
for sure.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, you just consider the different religious orders, and they all have such different charisms and apostolates, but they're all
absolutely.
authentically Catholic.
But
Um,
maybe that's a good way to say it is that these people have discerned their vocations and they know who they are in the Lord, right? They know who the Lord is calling them to be.
so you mentioned tithing.
Hmm.
How well does that correlate with somebody identifying as an intentional disciple?
We didn't ask about that at all, so
Okay.
I don't want to speculate.
Sure, sure.
I said that just because I feel like I, other studies have shown that the more we are active in church, the more we give to church.
Mhm.
That follows. Makes sense. But we didn't ask about that in this study.
Okay, gotcha. And were there any other really interesting correlates or factors where if people do X, they also do Y, or vice versa?
So, okay, that's what's coming next. So I know this first kind of round of the results is us reporting on question by question, how did people respond?
Hmm.
We now are going back to the data and saying, all right, let's say of people who attend mass more often than just weekly, um, does is that does it is there a correlation that we can draw between them being more likely to say that Christ is the center of their lives, or things like that? Of is it true that baby boomers are more likely not to use digital aids in their thing? So, like making these cross tabulations, as they call them.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's coming. We're still doing that research now.
Okay, cool. Well, when that comes out, we'd love to have you back and talk
Okay.
more about
Yeah.
that.
Sure. Sure.
Um, the retreat and the spiritual direction thing is really interesting to me. So
Mhm.
about 1/5 you said attend spiritual direction or have ever gone to spiritual direction, and more
Mhm.
than half don't go on, I'm assuming, regular retreats, like annual retreats.
Right, right. Yeah.
Um,
So spiritual direction. So 48% have never received it. And another 33% have received spiritual direction in the past, but not currently. So only 20% are currently receiving it.
yeah,
Um,
wow.
we also asked them, is spiritual direction available in your home parish or any faith community to which you belong? And only 40% said it's available, 19% said it's not, and 41% said I don't know. And I think that's probably the biggest problem around spiritual direction is
Yeah,
just
yeah.
a lack of awareness. It's not as common of a thing for people to be thinking about.
That's really interesting. And then is it similar with retreats that people just they don't know or it's not
Um,
available?
Retreats we didn't ask as many specific questions about. Um,
Okay.
I can tell you this, just going back to spiritual direction just for a second. Um, we for in terms of the top reasons for not currently receiving it, um, the top reason both for people who have and for haven't received it in the past, they don't know how to find someone for spiritual direction. That was the top reason. And the second reason for people who have not done spiritual direction is that they don't really understand it. So there you go. There's that answer.
Gotcha. So if we go back to kind of like a marketing mindset there we need to start at the top of that funnel and help people even get familiar with the idea of it.
Yeah,
Do you think that's right?
I totally think so. I think when have you ever heard a priest even mention spiritual direction in a homily or any kind of public way?
It might be never.
Yeah, and this is not a commonly discussed thing. I don't. I definitely had never heard of it till I started working in ministry.
Yeah, I mean, I heard about it on retreats, but I had kind of a unique experience in the faith growing up because my parents gave me those opportunities to go on retreats,
Mm,
and that's probably where I first heard of it. So
mm,
even then, I kind of know I'm a little bit of a weirdo in terms of my
yeah.
experience. I'm an outlier.
Yeah.
Um,
But by the way, I wish I could give you the source for this, but I haven't. Someone told me about this, and I haven't seen the article yet that explains it. But apparently, a diocese did a program where everyone in confirmation class, all the students in confirmation class, were offered spiritual direction, and 100% of them took it. So everyone who was offered took it. And what's more is almost all of them, 90 something percent of those who received spiritual direction continued with the program and continued in their faith. And it made all the difference. I mean, imagine like high school and college students, like staying going to mass and staying alive in their faith. This was the difference maker. So it's a huge opportunity, I think.
We have to stop there on that for a second. I mean, like if there were light bulbs around everybody's screen, they should be going off right now because that's the problem. I mean, like
Yeah.
where the problem we're dealing with is disaffiliation. Maybe not the only problem, but that's one of the many problems. So the if I understand this, the most recent statistics, half of those kids aren't going to call themselves Catholic in just a few years,
Right.
as soon as they're done with confirmation. And so this was an intervention that completely flipped that.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And like I said, I was told about this and I haven't I just was I was just checking my email to see if this is if my friend had sent me the link, and I don't think so. But so if I come back and I have more information, I'll let you know, or I'll send it over to
Sure,
you.
sure.
So,
Yeah. If you're able to find it, we'll put that in the show notes. But
mhm.
that's I'm a big fan of collecting data. I'm a little bit of a nerd. That's my background. I did a degree in education, and that included a lot of research preparation. And so I enjoy playing with numbers and thinking about the best way to understand a situation. And I think people are sometimes a little intimidated to ask because they don't want to get the answer they're afraid of.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but the value in asking is where to go. I mean, like we talked about earlier, if you understand why people are responding a certain way to what you're offering, then you can
Mhm.
adjust so you can meet their needs better. And
Mhm.
I love the idea of tracking and checking in on people, even if it's just to let them know you care.
Absolutely. I mean, the accompaniment, this is what Pope Francis has been, that was his theme throughout the synod on synodality, right? For a reason.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's so important for us to feel like part of something, like we belong, and someone who knows us, and it's more than accountability, right? It's
right.
someone who gets to know you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot there, and I mean, it just matches up with so many other things that we know from sociology and other research. So the
Right.
Springtide Institute out of Colorado has a lot of really good stuff like this. The I can't remember the name of it now, but it's something like the long term study of religiosity in youth that came out of Notre
Okay.
Dame that
Okay.
touches on that. And that same study, the things you mentioned that intentional disciples do, that overlays very well with what successful parents do when they hand on the faith to
Hmm.
their children in terms of integrating it into all different aspects of life.
There you go.
Um, the Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I happen to be reading Thomas Merton's autobiography, The Seven Story Mountain, right now, and it's interesting because his parents were especially his mother, were very intentional about not giving him a religious foundation per se. They wanted him to be making the decisions, but he credits. He says, if I hadn't had some of the religious experiences I ended up having from not from his parents, but from other sources, he may never have become a priest and a monk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's certainly value in having other kind of wisdom figures and role models in life other than mom and dad, because at a certain
Mhm.
point you wonder, or do
Yeah.
they know anything anyway? Um,
Right, right, right.
and it's not till we're older that we realize they might.
Yeah,
Um,
but what really shines through is his faith in all that, because he constantly gives thanks to God for giving him exactly what he needed when he needed it. And I think that really is a demonstration of faith to say, you know however this has happened, God's giving me what I need when I need it.
yeah, I really like that. I've had similar thoughts in thinking about the way I hand the faith on to my daughter and try to help her know Jesus and become a disciple and a follower of Him.
Mhm.
And I have to trust that He's going to do for her what He did for me, and that
Mm.
it doesn't depend on my ability and my wisdom, but rather He's going to reveal Himself to her and convince her of His love for
Mhm.
her,
Mhm.
which relieves me of a lot of stress.
I bet. Yeah, yeah, that trust in the Lord. That's great.
So we talked about needs a little bit. It sounds like greater need for access to spiritual direction could be very beneficial.
Right.
Greater opportunity for people to attend retreats. Were there any
Yeah.
other needs that really? Feel free to talk about either one of those more. But are there other needs that rose to the surface?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the retreat thing. So what we really were trying to hone in on, the way we asked this portion of the questions was, we said, what kind of level of strength do you have in these areas? And then we asked them all again and said, where is the need for growth in these same areas? So so we were particularly looking for places where people had a lower level of strength, or at least not a high level of strength, and an acknowledged higher need for growth, right? So so where we saw that the most was actively witnessing and sharing my faith with others.
Mm.
Was not a particularly high level of strength, but an acknowledged need for growth. Humility, just simply humility, not a particularly high. Very actually, only 5% said that this was a high level of strength for them, and yet 21% acknowledged that this was a high need for growth area. Humility. Um, Going on retreat, like we said, was a really big one. 56% said they had no level of strength going on retreat. I take that to mean they don't go on retreats. you know,
Yeah.
and yet 30% said that there was a need for growth there. I think that was the highest need for growth acknowledged around
Oh,
retreats.
wow. Yeah. So there's both
Um,
a desire and perhaps a gap between what people want and what's available.
right. That's yeah. But then look at this. Regularly going to confession. 23% said no level of strength. 23%. I mean,
Wow.
I assume that means I'm not going to confession, or maybe once a year
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
34% said little level of strength. So combining them, 57%. Am I doing the math right? Yes.
It's over 50.
57% are saying none to little level of strength regularly going to confession. Need for growth 18 high need for growth 18% in that area. Finally, the last one I would highlight is performing the spiritual works of mercy and performing the corporal works of mercy.
Mm.
Um, Respectively, had 25% and 20% no level of strength, um,
Wow.
and certainly an acknowledged need for growth there as well.
Yeah. That's a challenge because those are not easy. They demand
Yeah.
your time as much as
Mm,
anything.
that's right. That's
Um,
right.
that's a
And your awareness, right, of the needs of others.
yeah. Yeah. For sure. Um, Those are all really interesting in terms of because it's not one thing. It's not like, oh, if there were and that I mean, it goes back to I think um, a dictum I like, the simple answer is not the answer. There's no one
Mm,
thing disciples
mm,
need. There's no one thing
mm,
followers of Jesus need. Human beings are not that simple. We're far too complex to be able to say like, there's one other than Jesus. Of course, Jesus answers all the questions, but
mhm.
in terms of what I need, what you need, what my neighbor needs to be a disciple, we have strengths and we have weaknesses. I really like that
Yeah.
you asked that. That's kind of a unique thing. I wouldn't have thought to ask that.
Thanks. Yeah. Does this match up with your lived experience?
It does.
As a disciple of Christ and as someone who has this ministry about discipleship.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. And it also matches up with probably my anecdotal observation, having worked in the church and being able to survey and say, okay, well, what are the strengths that we offer people? And going back to the hesitancy to share the faith and the comfort level in sharing that.
Mhm.
It's very rare that there's a program that offers that and prepares people for that.
Yeah.
Which is that's you could argue the single clearest thing we have to do. I mean, that and the works of mercy. The church exists to evangelize. This is the last thing Jesus said to do, um, and it's uncommon to find a program or an approach that intentionally prepares people to do that and gives them the skills to share the
Yeah.
faith and tell other people about Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we were talking before we started the show, about what the real purpose of the Great Commission is, right? And I really think that Jesus could have chosen to save us in any way. God, you know, Jesus was amazing, but God could have done it in other ways too, right? He uses whatever he likes at his disposal, and somehow he somehow Jesus let us know, no, it's through you that you're going to do this, and I think that's for us. That's for us to know one another, to decide to be that beacon for others, because something happens in that for us and for them. Yeah, it's very clear. I mean, we were just talking about accompaniment, right? Yes, is it amazing that we have technology that's allowing for this conversation right now? Absolutely. I love to be able
Hmm.
to talk to you, but would it be cooler if we were having a beer together somewhere? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
it would be. Yep. Absolutely. I would far rather lug this equipment and set it up somewhere in a, in a place where we could just hang out together, or
Right,
just talk. But yeah,
right.
the especially when I read Acts and I look at the early Christian community, the faith apart from community makes no sense. Like being a follower of Jesus
Mhm.
apart from community does not make any sense. And
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
it's meant to be shared. We're meant to share our lives with one another. I mean, very simply what Jesus did. And I
absolutely.
think the more closely we can emulate his life in all aspects, the
Yeah.
more perfectly we will live the life of discipleship.
We also asked about community involvement, by the way, in case you want to talk about that,
Yeah, yeah.
since we've gotten here. Good segue.
What does it look like?
Well, by far, so more than three quarters are involved in a group, and most often faith related. So 63% are involved in some kind of faith group, which is way more than the other types of groups. Um, Interestingly, sports and fitness is the only group category, the group type that meets more often than faith. The faith groups that they attend. So those are the ones that are meeting weekly, even more often than faith groups. But this group 73% of this group looks forward to participating in the faith group a great deal, more than any other type of group. So perhaps unsurprisingly, but it's nice to see. It's nice to
Yeah,
see the
yeah.
data kind of support that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Um, and in terms of the best features of these groups, and this is across types for faith, professional education, hobby groups, sports, whatever, all these types of groups, community and fellowship is the leading feature. That is what people are interested in. That's what they're going for.
Oh,
So
wow.
so there you go.
We start by helping people belong. And
Hmm.
if they have a place to belong, then they'll stick around for the ride.
Hmm.
That's another one of those things. It's like, okay, that deserves a full stop to say, okay, are the things that we offer an opportunity for fellowship and community? And if they're not, it shouldn't be any wonder if people don't stick around.
Right. And further to that point, um, so this group expresses a high interest in connecting with other faithful Catholics, um, but it diminishes based on how far away we're talking. So we asked, like, are you interested in making connections with others, making faith connections with others locally at a diocesan level, regionally, nationally, and internationally? And it essentially goes down as you go. So
Oh
I
yeah,
think that's to that point, right? You're not going to be having a drink with someone who's in Malaysia. Like you're this
right.
is and I think people just recognize, like, yes, there's some desire to know these people and be journeying with them, and hopefully the synod is doing something like that. But I think they recognize that real accompaniment, real authentic community is going to be in person relationships a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah. So um, it would be it'd be tough to not talk about the pandemic and the decline in
Mm.
mass attendance. What do you think these results can tell us about that?
It's a good question. We put so besides allowing for people to say that the mass attendance was online if it was for them,
Hmm.
we didn't ask anything about the pandemic, and that was intentional. We wanted this to be a little more evergreen than just whatever the pandemic had wrought, and
Hmm.
kind of also understanding that this particular audience would probably be the least affected by the pandemic. Hopefully, affected in their demonstration of their faith.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, you know, um, so what does this tell us? I think it tells us that um, along those lines of wanting to know people in person, that this was a huge hardship that and that and maybe what happened when churches were closed were that people who with a looser affiliation to their faith found other ways of finding community, and maybe church became less important to them. I mean, I'm starting to speculate. Like I said, we didn't ask about that specifically,
Right,
but
right.
I would guess that that's when you I don't know, if let's say if chicken became unavailable, completely unavailable to eat, would you stop? Would you stop eating poultry? No, you might start eating turkey a little more. Or like, you know what I mean? Like people find substitutions. If your faith is kind of interchangeable with just if all it is a community gathering or a way to have status in your community or like something silly that has nothing to do with the gospel. If that's all your faith really is, and it was already weak, then yeah, like I'm not surprised people are dissociating from church because they found something else to substitute with.
Yeah, yeah. And following the trend that you just described of the closer the community is, the more likely people are want to engage with it.
Yeah,
I mean, how motivated would I be to participate in a virtual community versus an in-person community?
yeah,
Again, for myself, an N of one. I'm not interested in virtual community if I have in-person community at
yeah.
my fingertips.
Yeah. Yeah. I personally like a mix. I'm able to stay connected to Brooklyn where I lived for so long, by being in, like, for example, a Zoom book club that I lead, with folks over there, mostly from
Yeah, yeah.
parishes, in Brooklyn. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like that can never take the place of a friend coming over to play darts or something,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And it probably depends a little bit on what you're doing. Reading a book over the internet, yeah, you can do that pretty successfully. But playing darts and eating, you
Yeah.
can't share a meal over the internet nearly
Yeah.
as with as much satisfaction.
Yeah. So I think there's a place, but people need to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of each and, hopefully favor the in-person stuff. The stuff
Yeah,
that's actually going to bring about I mean, how many times do you know someone that kind of came into the church because of a virtual or digital thing? I'm not saying there's no place for that stuff. I think like some of that like early funnel, right, content can
hmm,
can be really helpful in getting people to start thinking about that.
yeah,
But
for sure.
but then there has to be some kind of, in-person accompaniment as well.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the point you made earlier, disciples use both physical and digital tools to assist in
Yeah,
their relationship with the Lord, and it's that's not going to be. I don't think this can be any different for the general population in terms of like being able to at first enter into the church and start that relationship with Jesus and then grow.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, staying up on both fronts is good.
Mhm. Yeah.
So where, as much as you could say, where do you think we can go from here?
Yeah, so I think that this is a useful report for 3 audiences. For just the average Catholic, especially devout Catholics who I think those are probably the ones listening to your show, so,
Hmm.
love to be talking to them. Um, so I think there's stuff we can do for them. I think there's stuff that people can do who work in ministry for the church, that I think there's direct, to-dos for them. And then there's helpful things for DeSales, DeSales Media. That's why we did this study. So first of all, just for the average Catholic and especially devout Catholics, um, read this study and get to know what intentional disciples look like, especially what their faith journeys look like, because it's important to know. Uh, when you look around the parish and you see people in different kind of stages of their faith journeys, it's important to recognize people who might be pretty close to taking that plunge into really dropping their nets, as Sherry Weddell says,
Yeah, yeah,
right? The I think it's really important to kind of notice who's close, who needs the extra encouragement, the nudge. One of the things we found on the faith journey is that um, most people describe it as a mix of both significant breakthrough moments and a long, gradual path. And only 5% of respondents said that their faith journey was just significant breakthrough moments. But a lot of times in media, like the inspirational movies and stuff that we see are about those breakthrough moments because it's more cinematic, right? It's more there's
yeah.
this stylization, but unfortunately, that's not the reality. So just recognizing that it's going to take time. These are gradual things most of the time. Um, so anyway, just getting to know what the persona is of these folks and what the faith journey looks like. For people in ministry, I think that we talked about spiritual direction. We talked about retreats. There is clearly some white space that exists that's among the unmet needs. And I think that
Hmm.
this is a very addressable. Some of these are very addressable problems or challenges, if you will. People don't like the word problem these days. um, and for DeSales, similarly, we 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 don't need to go it alone. I think a lot of times there's unnecessary. I'm all for competition. I understand that it drives innovation, all that kind of stuff. But I also think that people often don't look to partner first in the church. We have a lot of unnecessary competition that ends up making duplication of work instead of sharing resources.
Yeah.
So what I would seek is to I hope what I'm hoping for in all this is to start conversations with other organizations that are in ministry, or even individuals who are interested, and to say, how can we journey together? How can we actually tackle some of these problems? What are you interested in? How do you want to solve this stuff? So that's what I'm kind of hoping for.
I like that. I love working alongside people and partnering with them. And
Yeah.
different groups are really good at different things, and
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
healthy to do that together.
Yeah. Amen.
And the third group.
Well, the third group was us, so I kind of
Okay,
combined that.
gotcha,
So yeah,
gotcha.
so
Okay,
the need for DeSales is really just to connect with others who are moved by this data, and you know see an opportunity that we can maybe work together on. Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah. So when you say ministry, that also includes bishops and clergy and
Oh
people
yeah,
involved. Okay,
absolutely. Diocese is welcome. I mean, look, anyone who wants to talk to me about this, I'm very well. In fact, you can, if you go on to salesmedia.org, DESALES media.org, like St. Francis de Sales, our patron saint, you can find the contact form and get in touch with us. And I would love to start an email or however you want to get in touch. Um, Also, I should mention that's where you can get the study. So
perfect.
desalesmedia.org/discipleship, desalesmedia.org/discipleship. You can download the report for free.
And there will be a link to that in the show notes. So if you missed it, then it'll be right there for you. All you got to do is click on it. Well, Dave, thanks so much. It was really great talking with you about this study, and I want to say thank you to you and to DeSales Media for putting the study on. I know these things don't happen for free, so this was an
Yeah.
investment that you all took upon yourselves, and this is going to be good for the entire church. And so, on behalf of the entire church, I thank you for this because it's going to help more people come to know the love of Jesus.
Thanks so much, Dan.
You bet. Well, God bless you, friend. And when the second half of the study comes out, we would love to have you back on and talk about that.
I'd love to be here. God bless.
You as well. All right, friends. Thanks so much. God bless you. And we'll see you next time.